Hey, lovely people. So, as promised, this is the episode of the Bookcast Club podcast that I was on recently with Sarah and Jenny, where we each talked about a short story. The short stories are available to read online, links in the show notes. Please enjoy. It was an absolute hoot to be part of this episode.
Hello, welcome to the Bookcast Club, a podcast of people who like to chat books. Is that right? I think it's right. My name is Sarah, and I'm coming to you from the Netherlands, and today we are very happy to be joined again by Shawn from Shawn the Book Maniac, who is coming to you from Saskatoon, right, in Canada?
Saskatoon, Canada.
Saskatoon. And Jen is here as well, coming to you from Norwich in the UK. Sorry for just storming the intro. Normally I let you talk yourselves, don't I? But not today. Today I'm doing it all.
Cracking on.
Hello, yeah. Jen asked me to introduce, and so that's me introducing, talking for everyone. What we're going to do today, we've got a bit of a fun episode. We're going to talk about the stuff that we've been currently reading and currently enjoying, as per usual. And then we have read, each of the three of us chose a short story, which the three of us then each read. So we've got three short stories, one chosen by each of us, and we've all read them, and we're going to discuss them as a fun little sort of mini, broken up, cool book club episode. How are you, Shawn? How's it going? What's happened to you since you last came on the pod? Any news?
What's happened to me since I last came on the pod? Well, it's all anticlimactic after last being on the pod, but let me think. No, I'm just bumbling along here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, not working very much, devoting more of my time to reading and booktubing than to actual work in the real world, and I'm kind of liking that work-life balance.
Sorry, I'm waiting for Jen to talk. She's not talking.
I'm sorry.
I thought Jen was
I saw
working.
you unmute yourself earlier.
Yeah, sorry. I thought you were working up. I thought you had, from the expression on your face, Jen, I thought you had a thought, but you didn't.
No, I don't have many thoughts today.
No, I can see that. It's fine. I'll fill it in. You're about to go back to... Have you gone back to work yet or not? You're
Not
September,
yet.
right?
Yeah. Mid-September I go back. So like gearing up towards Robin starting school at the moment. So yeah, no, it's it'd be quite nice when she goes back and Dylan goes to the childminder and I have some me time back, even though it'll be working. It is quite nice to have adult interaction rather than just children all the time. So yeah, I'll be less frazzled.
You only have to spend an hour or so with us, so you'll suffer through it.
Oh, thank you.
Well, unlucky for her,
bed.
actually, as of Monday, I'm actually going to visit Jen on Monday.
Oh yeah, I get a day break from Sarah.
Yeah, she gets one day off tomorrow. And then Monday I'm going to Norwich, and I'm there until, I don't even know, Thursday or something. You get many days with
Yeah,
me,
I
mate.
think Thursday. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, good. Me too.
Then you can look after my children.
I know, yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing them, actually. I don't know if I'm looking forward to seeing them for 4 days, but I haven't met the younger one yet, but I've met your daughter, she's pretty...
Yeah.
She's hilarious. She's so... I hate it. I mean, you say it all the time. She's such hard work. She's so much like you, Jen. She is hard work.
Yeah. Every time we have an incident with Robin or she does something, me and Ben are always saying, you know who she gets that from? So yeah, she's good fun. They're both good fun.
Yeah, they're great kids. Jen, have you read anything since the last episode? Have you got any reading updates for us, please?
Well, I'm currently reading a couple of books. I have picked up from the library Fight Night by Miriam. Is it Toes?
It's pronounced Taves.
Taves.
Like saves, yes.
Thank goodness you're here, Shawn. So I feel like I should have heard of this author before, but I hadn't until I saw the film Women Talking and then realised that was based on one of her books. So I'd never heard of her before, but I'm quite a big fan of Hannah May on YouTube. I really like the books she reads and she really likes this author, so that's why I picked it up. And it is narrated by a 9-year-old girl called... Now, I'm probably not going to pronounce this right either, Shawn. It's spelled Swiv, so I don't pronounce it.
Oh, I have no idea. Swiv, I would pronounce
That's
it
how
Swiv,
what I would say. So that's what I'll call her. So Swiv,
Yeah.
who's 9 years old, and she lives with her mother and her grandmother. And they obviously have quite a turbulent life. Her mother is pregnant but isn't often at home, and her grandmother obviously has deteriorating health. And the book is written in letter format, although it isn't particularly obvious it's in letter format. It just starts off with her writing Dear Dad, and then the whole book is very stream of consciousness and just her thoughts, basically. But it's very funny and very witty. I've really laughed while reading it. It's just really, really clever, and I'm really glad to have picked up a book by this author, and I really want to read more from her. It's very, very well written. I usually find child narrators annoying and books written in letter format annoying. So the fact that I'm really enjoying this says a lot, really. The observations of a 9-year-old child make it very, very funny. I wish I'd highlighted some bits. I know I've taken pictures of the pages because some bits are just hilarious, especially her observations about her mum being pregnant, considering I've just had a baby myself. But yeah, I'm loving it, and I'm halfway through. I would highly recommend it already without even reaching the end of it. I think it might end up being quite sad, only because her grandmother's health is deteriorating. But yeah, it's brilliant, and I really want to read more. And I wish I'd known that she'd written women talking before I saw the film, because normally I like to read the book first, but alas, that's not how it happened.
Miriam Taves is one of my favorite writers, and I do recommend you read Women Talking, the novel, because it's even better than the movie, and I thought the movie was really good, but the book was my top read of whatever year I read it.
Ah, okay.
The other one of hers that I worship is the one, I believe it was the one just before Women Talking, and it's called All My Puny Sorrows. And it's about a pair of sisters, Mennonite Canadian sisters, both extremely talented. The narrator is a YA author, or a young children's book author, and her sister is a musician. And her sister has, how shall I put this? I think probably the best way to put it is she has very severe psychiatric issues, and is suicidal. And it's the relationship between them, and that story is told with so much humor. I don't know how she did it, because it's hilarious, and it's really sad and really intense, and that's Miriam Taves' trademark.
Is it? I was going to ask, does she write
Writing
humorous
heavy
books?
stories. She does, although I don't think there's any in Women Talking. Oh, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, the film definitely wasn't
tiny
funny.
Bit. No, not much. But and she's written a whole bunch. She's written probably 10 or 12 other novels before that, but
yeah,
those are the ones that I recommend the most.
It's exciting to find an author that you like that then has a big back catalogue of books that you can go back and read.
Absolutely.
What about you, Shawn? What are you enjoying at the moment?
I have just, I'd like to briefly talk about two. One I just finished the day before yesterday, and it is a debut queer Nigerian novel called And Then He Sang a Lullaby by Annie Kayode Somtujuku. I'll send the Goodreads link because it's difficult spelling and pronunciation. And I'm going to be doing a Zoom chat for my channel tomorrow with a Nigerian bookstagrammer about it. We've both read it, and I couldn't believe that a debut queer novel that had just been published in Nigeria was also available in the bookstore in Saskatoon. But it's from, what's her name? Roxane Gay's imprint, Roxane Gay Books. So it's available around the world, and I loved it. It's a very, very strong debut, very emotional, very political. It's about two gay men in Nigeria, fairly close to the present day, and all the incredible homophobia that they encounter. There's a lot of violence, a lot of homophobia, a lot of courage, a lot of politics, and the characters just jump off the page. And it's very relatable to me as a gay man who didn't grow up in Nigeria. And there's so much about life in Nigeria and the politics and the social issues. It just sings. And Then He Sang a Lullaby. I loved it with all my heart. And I have already read my top read of the year. So I should have said this when Sarah asked what was new, because this is the most exciting thing that's happened to me recently, is this book, another debut from Sweden, translated. Collected works by Lydia Sandgren, translated from the Swedish by Agnes Broom. It is a crime. It should be going to the International Criminal Court that this book wasn't nominated for the Booker International this year, because it is one of the very best novels that I've ever read. And it was just published in English, I think, in January of this year. And the premise is that the mother, a really talented academic and artist, walks out on her young family, her husband, I think maybe 10-year-old daughter, and a newborn son. And she just walks out one day and never comes back, and they never hear from her again. And we pick up, the opening of the novel is picking up with that family 10 years on, 15 years on, as they've got this big hole in their lives, and they're kind of trying to live life as if this never happened, and just being as befuddled by the mundane as you or I. But the trauma of her leaving all those years ago gradually seeps back into the story in a way that immerses you, certainly immersed me, in Swedish life in this era, all the art, all the artists, all the writers, all the politics of that time. And I didn't know very much about Sweden, and I can't believe that so much of Swedish life and everyday life, mundanity and trauma, was spun together in a page-turner of a novel that was 600 pages of very tiny type. And the thing that I feel the most ripped off about, it wasn't twice as long. I absolutely loved it.
What's it called? Collected Works.
Collected Works, which is a strange title for a novel.
Yeah.
And when you realize about 4/5 of the way in what the title means, and I ain't going to tell you right now, but when you realize what it means, I think you'll probably be almost as devastated as I was.
That sounds amazing, that book. I've not heard of it, so...
I don't want to oversell it, but I really don't think that I have. I mean, it won't
I don't
be for
oversell
everybody,
it, but it's the best book I've read all year.
Well, it is. It's one of the best books I've read in my life. It's one of the best books I've read, best novels I've ever read. So
I don't think that's overselling it. I want to read it now. That sounds great. Even if it is 600 pages with small font, I might still give it a go.
I've heard of one reader who thought it was too long, and then everybody else is as excited about it as I am.
I am reading an arc, actually, for once. This is the first arc I've read in like 2 years. I know. It's because patrons will know I deleted my TBR in a sort of act of madness. Random act of violence. Yeah, which has been very thrilling. So now I don't have a TBR anymore, meaning a to-read list at all. And then I read, what was I reading? I was reading a New York Times article. I really like the New York Times book review section, whatever that's called. I subscribe to that. And I was reading an article about upcoming books. And they were talking about Lauren Gruff's newest book, which is called The Vaster Wilds, which is coming out in September. Which I hadn't even, not that I really keep up with current releases, but I didn't realize that she was coming up with a new novel this year. And it sounded quite interesting, and so I requested it. I contacted Random House and asked them for it, and they said yes. So I've got it from Random House, which is very nice of them. And it is about it's a sort of weird post-apocalyptic-y The Road type book so far, where it's just a girl who is completely abandoned and she's running away from something. I don't think you know what yet. I've read about 60 pages of it. And it seems to be historical, I think. As per usual, I didn't look up anything before I started it. Oh, that's right, it's early America. So she's a colonial American. And she's run away from wherever she is. I think she's whatever house. I think she was a servant, I think. And so she's run away. And at the moment, she's absolutely freezing and she's trying to get food and survive. And it is very, very beautifully written. It reminds me, it's about halfway between Sarah Moss and Maggie O'Farrell in terms of literary writing, I would say. So she's sort of a less over-the-top version of Maggie O'Farrell. I think I haven't read any Lauren Groff before, but I was talking to Chris about this a few days ago, and he said that sounded like other Lauren Groffs that he's read. So very, very beautifully written, very strong sense of place, very strong setting, but no plot so far. It's literally just her running, her being scared, her being very cold, and her trying to eat. and her thinking about where she's left, and that's all that's happened thus far in sort of 60 pages. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know.
Speaking existentially, what else is there really?
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be nice if something happened, one way or the other.
I'm a big fan of no plot, all vibes. It's all good. I've only
Yeah,
ever
me
read
too.
her debut, which I think was called The Monsters of Templeton. So this was years ago when I was first like getting back into reading, and I remember enjoying it. But even all those years ago, I can kind of see where the comparison with Maggie O'Farrell might be coming from.
Closer to Sarah Moss, I would say. It really reminds me of Sarah Moss's writing. I don't know what I was casting my mind around for then. It just really reminds me of Sarah Moss in the feel, something about it, the tone, the vibe. Also a little bit like Sarah Perry, as in the Essex Serpent, Sarah Perry. Just as kind of similar, but a little bit more on the Maggie O'Farrell. Like, I'm in my head, I'm thinking of it like a scale. She's edging towards Maggie O'Farrell in the description, but not necessarily in a bad way for me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've only read a couple of Maggie O'Farrell's, which I liked to certain degrees, and I have not had good experiences with the other writers she's being compared to, so I'm not sure. I haven't tried Lauren Groff myself.
Yeah, I like Sarah Moss. I like Sarah Perry. I'm not a Maggie O'Farrell fan. Not to be so negative on the podcast today, but yeah. But most people do. I'm sure you would love it, Jen.
Yeah, on the sliding scale from Maggie O'Farrell to Sarah Moss. No, I probably would. I quite like all those authors, so I probably would enjoy it. I'm listening to one other book, which I got in a flurry of excitement because everybody's talking about it, and that is Penance by... what's her name? Eliza... Oh, bloody hell.
Eliza
It is
Clark.
Eliza Clark, yeah. I think she wrote a book called Boy Parts, which was
Oh, yeah.
also...
I remember
Yes,
that.
she did, which I haven't read. but
I haven't
it's
read.
on my
And I remember it
list.
being big at the time. I don't think maybe she writes the novels I thought she wrote, so I thought she was more of a literary fiction writer. This is very much a crime thriller book, and I don't really know if I'm enjoying it or not. The premise at the moment, and I'm probably about a quarter of the way through, is that a schoolgirl has been murdered by seemingly her school friends, and what they did was they trapped her in a chalet and they set the chalet alight, and that's what you know. And then the book is narrated by it's narrated mainly by a true crime writer who has found this case, found it interesting. It wasn't big in the news at the time, and he's trying to resurrect his failing career and has picked this case to write about, and he's interviewing people that were involved. Yeah, I don't know if I'm enjoying it, but I think I will keep listening.
I've just looked at it. Says that it's set on the eve of the Brexit vote.
Which is why the case wasn't very big in the media, is the take she's gone with. I don't know if listening to it is the best way, because I get the impression it's mixed media format, because one element of it is definitely told through this podcast, which is a true crime podcast hosted by some idiots, basically. That's quite hard to listen to when somebody's narrating script back to you by three assholes. So it's not an enjoyable read.
Hitting rather close to
people
home.
listening to this episode will have the same feeling, I'm sure.
Exactly. Sean and I are both like,
These asshole
This is getting very
co-hosts.
meta.
yeah, this is weird. I can't stand podcasts. People who don't know what they're talking about. What right do they have? That's basically what you're saying. I was like,
Oh dear. Yeah, so not enjoying it that much at the moment. We'll see where we get to.
At this stage, anything about Brexit is a hard no. A hard no. Hey, great. It's a hard no for me because I didn't even live in the UK, but I'm so over Brexit. Like, it's all anyone's talked about the last 5 years here. Me being in the Netherlands, as a reminder to anyone. To everyone. It's just it's like the other side of it for here, where everyone just talks about how much better they are than the UK in every way, shape, and form. Basically, you're like, all right, cool. It's just a huge ego trip. Like, it's the same vibe. Not to insult everyone in the Netherlands, but in the same way that kind of a lot of the world looks at America, a lot of the Western world are like, haha, look at them. That's very much the way a lot of or some European countries. I probably shouldn't say too much. I'm going to insult people, but that's the vibe, and I'm a bit sick of it.
So what you're really telling us is that you are doing penance by reading penance.
I feel like it. Yeah, it's and the other thing is some of the girls in it that they've got transcript from, and I know we do it using the word like when you don't need to use it, but to listen to that is really difficult. It's when we write the subtitles on social media for our little voiceovers, I wouldn't include those likes that we use that are just superfluous to conversation. So I don't know, it's not something I like in books when they use that narrative voice to make somebody sound young. I just think we get it, they're young, you don't need to make them sound young.
You'd better be careful, Jen, and edit this episode carefully and make sure you remove all these things.
Every single like
and is out.
Yeah, so cut it all out. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe I'll report back and I'll love it by the end, but I doubt it. This is where we pop a little ad break in to tell you all about the different ways you can support the pod, most of which are totally free. A really effective and easy way of showing your support is by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. There is a link in the show notes that will take you straight to the Apple Podcast page where you can write a review. If you listen on Spotify, you can also very easily give us a star rating. You can also share our posts on social media. We're at Bookcast Club on Instagram. I was going to say Twitter, but I've actually deleted Twitter now. And TikTok. You can sign up to our free monthly newsletter on Substack, where we share even more book recommendations, our pick of the new releases, and all the latest podcast news. But the best way for us to find new listeners is by you telling your book-loving friends and family about us. If you want to support the podcast financially, we do have a Patreon account. You can sign up for as little as £2 a month. We offer early access to the podcast, a close friends feed on Instagram, monthly bonus episodes, and our top tier will get you all of the above and personalised book recommendations. We get you to fill in a survey, and then we tailor our book recommendations to your preferences. We will also send you books in the post. There are over 20 bonus episodes you can get instant access to if you sign up as a Patreon today. We now also offer a 7-day free trial with our bonus tier. The link is in our show notes. But however you choose to show your support, we as always want to say a huge thank you. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners.
So let's talk about our three. So we've each chosen a short story. Let's go through them one by one. Let's start with Shawn's. Shawn, would you like to talk about yours that you chose?
I very much would, but I also don't have a lot of language to talk about it. It's one of those stories that just hit me in a way that's like, what the hell did I just read, and why do I love it so much? And I don't know how many answers I have to that. The title is The Swim Team, and it's from a 2007 collection of short stories called No One Belongs Here More Than You by Miranda July. And I'm buddy reading this collection with a friend, and just read this story last week. And so when we started thinking about about stories for this episode, there was no other choice but this one, because I'd really like to hear what you people thought of it. It's framed as a second-person address by this, I assume she's a young woman, but I don't know how old the narrator is, but she's addressing it to a ex-boyfriend that she didn't realize until 5 minutes ago was her ex, because we find out at the end of the story, and this is a story that's impossible to spoil, but we find out at the end that she sees her boyfriend with another woman, so she thinks, okay, I guess we have broken up, and pots within that this story about her living in a hamlet, a really tiny little town called Belvedere, years ago. And she's kicking herself because her boyfriend was really curious to hear about her life, her previous life in this small town, and she didn't tell him very much, and she wonders if this is why he dumped her. And then we get the story, and the story is crazy, and I thought very poignant, which is that she's there all alone. The narrative is so destabilized that we're not sure how much of this has actually happened, or why she's there, or how stable of a narrator, how reliable of a narrator she is. But within that instability, the story proceeds that she bumps into some elderly citizens of the town in the grocery store who are talking about swimming and the fact that none of them can swim. And she offers to give them swimming lessons, despite the fact that there are no bodies of water or swimming pools in the area. And they come to her house, and she teaches them to swim by setting up bowls of water on the floor and putting them through their paces. And that's the basic premise of the story. And I thought it contained worlds within it.
So I thought I'd start by saying that this is one of Alice, who is a co-host on this podcast. This is one of her favourite short story collections, which I've never read. And out of the 3 short stories that we've chosen, this is the one that I had to kind of really think about what I thought it was about and what I thought it meant. But there was something in it that I really connected with, and I love it when short stories do that. All she says is that something like, these people must be dead by now, because they were obviously elderly when she was teaching them to swim. And
Yes.
It's a thought that I have all the time, and I don't know why my brain does it, but if I look at an old photograph or I see a film that's from 20 years ago that has a dog in, my brain immediately goes, that dog must be dead by now. And I do it with people, and I do it with animals, and I don't know why my brain does it, but that's what happens. And the fact that she says it, I was like, I love that she's captured just a human trait like that. That's something that people do that can't really be explained particularly. Yeah, just that one moment in it made me really connect with the story, even if it's the rest of it's nonsense. I've just really liked that particular moment.
That's interesting.
I also spent way more time. It's really short, so I spent way more time.
The shortest, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the shortest one. It's also the one that I thought the most about, and it's also the one that is maybe the most obscure in terms of its meaning. And I think I spent more time reading about what this short story meant and reading analysis of it than I did actually reading the story. Yes. You read it quite quickly, and then I was like, what was that? Then I went and read loads of different opinions and interpretations about what it meant. That was a great summary, by the way, Shawn, that you just made of the story. Especially the fact that they're swimming, when she's teaching them to swim, they're not in the water. And I read so many different interpretations of what that meant, and what her role in, what it meant that she wasn't in the water with them, how she was sort of controlling them in such a way, and also the fact that she was lying. She makes these comments throughout that makes you realize that she could be lying or she might be lying, but whether that's actually happening or not is never actually revealed.
There's still an element of emotional truth to it, however much you might not trust her as a narrator, that this story just tugged on me. One of the things I think we can say about the narrator is she's not the most confident person in the world, and yet this was an experience she had in her past where she met the moment. Oh God, maybe we need to edit that one out too.
No,
She met the moment. That's what politicians think. But she knew what to do, and she did it, and it made a real beautiful experience for these elderly people. And I don't think she's had many of those experiences in her life. So she's looking back on it almost as an isolated, and her lack of self-confidence is that, I guess my boyfriend and I are not together anymore. She just doesn't really, she's not really connected to kind of a confident progression of her life. And I may be extrapolating from similar protagonists in other stories, but that's my that's my sense of her. And that she had this one experience that she's regretting that she didn't share this experience with her boyfriend, because maybe he would have seen more, would have appreciated who she was more. And that was touching. And I can kind of relate to that, actually.
I don't know if I read into this wrong or read it wrong, but she says something at the start that made me think that she hadn't told her boyfriend the story because she didn't know whether he would be accepting of the story or something like that.
Yeah, that's true. And there's this
certainly.
Yeah, sorry, Shawn. There's this weird line where she says, "I didn't care if he knew that I'd been a prostitute, but I maybe not that exactly. But the point is that she doesn't care if he knows that part about her, but this she hasn't told him.
But this story she wasn't comfortable in sharing, and I wonder if it was almost like this was her true calling and her true self, and actually if she showed that to him, she was scared that he was going to leave her." And I don't know if I've completely misread that, but maybe that's just what I've taken away from the story.
No, I don't think so. But I don't think so, but I'd like to read those sentences because there's just a few sentences at the beginning. This the opening paragraph. This is the story I wouldn't tell you when I was your girlfriend. You kept asking and asking, and your guesses were so lurid and specific. Was I a kept woman? Was Belvedere like Nevada, where prostitution is legal? Was I naked for the entire year? The reality began to seem barren, and in time I realized that if the truth felt empty, then I probably would not be your girlfriend much longer. That's what we get at the opening.
I'm enjoying talking about this one because it's only literally like 5 pages long, and I like how much we've taken from it.
I know, this is why was so eager to discuss it with you.
Yeah, it was very thinky. And also, such a strong image. Like, I can just see this so clearly in my mind. I really like that element of short stories where you just get dropped into this thing and there's essentially no character building. You don't know who any of these people are. You don't know any of the context. And I think the things that short stories can do so amazingly, which this one has done exactly, is give you this tiny weird drop of this tiny moment. And for me, it's those 3, especially when she talks about how they would do laps and she would arbitrarily decide where the edge of the pool was, and then she would blow her whistle and they would have to turn around on the floor. Like, it's such a strong image, and it's so brilliantly described. And the way she describes how each of her students would take to it differently, like it was brilliant.
Yeah, it really. Have either of you read the short story collection Jesus' I don't know how do you pronounce that with Jesus apostrophe S. Is it pronounced Jesus' son or Jesus' son?
Jesus'
anyway,
son is what I'd say, but
Jesus' son. Anyway, so that one by Dennis Johnson. There's a similar wackiness to those stories that also has an undercurrent of emotional intensity and potency. That I thought of it as I've been thinking about that collection as I've been reading. I've read the first 3 stories of this so far.
I've shared a link in the chat on here when I was, like you, Sarah, looking at analysis of this story. I found a YouTube video where I think somebody has done a very short film of this.
I found it too. I haven't watched it yet.
I watched
just found it
like
this morning.
The first sort of 5 minutes. I don't know how well it's acted. But I've shared it so that we can watch it afterwards. But I could see in the little like scroll bar at the bottom of YouTube that the way they practice swimming, they've got their heads in like bowls of water, and it looks very funny. So
which is
be worth
how
a watch.
I imagine it was. Yep.
Salty bowls of water.
I found these 2 sentences. She's describing the first lesson. I admitted these were not perfect conditions for learning to swim, but, I pointed out, this was how Olympic swimmers trained when there wasn't a pool nearby. Yes, this was a lie, but we needed it because we were 4 people lying on the kitchen floor, kicking it loudly, as if angry, as if furious, as if disappointed and frustrated, and not afraid to show it.
Yeah, I laughed out loud at that bit, I think. I was like, what is this? Pretty funny.
Love it.
Well, I am absolutely delighted that you connected with it.
No, it's great.
Fabulous.
Yeah, it was a great recommendation, Shawn.
Good choice.
Shall we do mine next?
Yes.
Yes.
So I chose The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K LeGuin, which I'd sort of forgotten about this, but Chris and I did an episode about short stories like ages ago, more than a year ago, I think, 1.5 years ago. When I went to choose one, I was like, oh, that's right, Chris recommended loads. Maybe I'll actually go back and listen to what he actually said and obey his directive. And this was one of the short stories that he recommended, which I said at the time I would read and then promptly didn't. So this is, Ursula K LeGuin, of course, is a science fiction fantasy writer. And this is about a town, this is a completely fantastical, a town that is filled with people who are blissfully, perfectly, and wonderfully happy in every single way. So she's describing basically like a utopia, essentially, where you've got this sort of like city where they've got this kind of festival on and everyone is wonderfully happy and everything's exciting and colourful and there's music and everything's perfect. And she's addressing the reader throughout, saying like, do you believe this? Do you believe this happiness is possible? And then later in the I mean, it's a short story, so it's very short, but I think it's about 6 pages, and then a few pages later, it's revealed that the only reason that this town is so blissfully happy is that because there's essentially a child who is imprisoned in this in this town, and this child's happiness is basically sacrificed for the rest of the town. So this child lives in a state of essentially torture, and is shown no kindness, no happiness, and lives in this horrible, deprived state. And that's the price that all of the people in the town have to pay for their blissful happiness. And the story is about how everyone in this town lives this wonderful, happy life, and everyone in this town at some point in their lives when they're a child learn that this is how it's done, and that they have this child that is sort of the sacrifice of the town. And it's about the fact that most people will sort of justify it to themselves one way or the other, and then you get these few people who are the ones that leave the town, and that's the title of the story, the ones who walk away from Omelas.
I loved it. I was surprised by how much I loved it because it was very philosophical, and I'm not much of a philosophy person, and I don't like much philosophy in my fiction, and I thought it was profound, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it either. So that was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I enjoyed this one. When I got to the bit about the child being kept, that's when I realised I'd heard you talking about it before. I think firstly this is one of the stories that is more beautiful to read, like her setting and her scenery and the festival that she's describing. You can tell she's a sci-fi fantasy writer, just because the world she creates feels that way. So I enjoyed that element of it, because I haven't read many short stories like it really, where there's quite a lot of world building that happens as well. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I felt like the message was simpler than the other two that we've read, and that kind of I took away from it that there's no happiness without sadness, and joy without trauma, and that you can't have one without the other, otherwise how would you know what happiness was? I think the only thing that I want to ask you two is what you felt the ones that were walking away from it, what had they come to realise and understand that made them walk away? That's the only bit I thought I need to talk this out with someone, because I don't know where I felt like they were going to, or what they thought they were walking away from, other than the obvious. I really loved this. Agree, because it was sort of, they're not morally objecting really, because they simply leave. Like, they don't want to, they object to what's happening to this child, but not to the point where they would actually do something about it. Like, it was an interesting, they sort of remove themselves from the problem, which doesn't change the problem in and of itself. They've just sort of like buried their head. So it's sort of, I guess, the question of whether it's worse to be actively involved, sort of allowing it to happen by being one of the people that benefits from this, or being one of the people that walks away from it. But the end result is the same for that child. Like, it makes no difference to the child whether you're participating in it happily or whether you've walked away. So is that a metaphor for, I don't know, like embracing your sadness and your trauma in order to be more joyful at times in your life? That's what I couldn't quite work out, is what message she was trying to put across with the ones that walked away. I
read it more as a social phenomenon, a social narrative, rather than just that there was a personal message, that there was an interpersonal message, there was a social message, which is that utopias are inherently as evil as, they create the same evil, they perpetuate the same evil, or the same evil bubbles up in order to keep it supposedly a utopia. And my idea of the people leaving is that they were going to wander off and create their own utopia, and something similarly dark and evil was going to be created there, and then some people would leave, and that there's a historical analogy or something there, I think.
Okay, interesting.
Thank you, Shawn. That's what I needed.
I read it, interestingly, I read it slightly differently. I read it to be a little bit more about, from my reading of it was a bit more about people intervening on things and choosing to get involved. I was thinking of, I don't know if you guys know, oh my God, I can't remember this famous experiment. I need to look it up. There's a very famous experiment that I should know because I have
I
two
think I know
psychology
the one
degrees.
about inflicting pain.
Yeah, the Milgram prison. The Milgram. I'm not thinking. There's the Stanford prison experiment, which I'm not thinking of, and then there's the Milgram torture experiment.
That one sounds nice.
Well, it's the Milgram experiments. It made me think of the Milgram experiments, which is this famous and highly unethical set of experiments that happened, I want to say in the 60s, that you learn about if you do a degree in psychology. It's like the first thing that you do. And the experiment was that the experimenters told the participants that they had to cause pain to someone, and it was actually all fake. There actually was no one being caused pain, but they sort of would hook someone up sort of falsely to this like electrical stimulators, and they would make the participants, they would say press the button when they get it wrong, I think, or something. They had to press the buttons in order to hurt this person. And it was an experiment that happened after the Second World War to see how people can cause pain or make other people be in pain when that authority is taken away from them. And so what would happen during the experiment is that the participant would press the buttons to cause pain to this old man. And then when the old man would start screaming and saying that it hurt, the experimenter would say, just keep going, just keep going. And then it was about which participants, they were trying to see who would stop and who would refuse to do it and who would say, well, this is part of the experiment, I'll just keep doing it. And that's what the short story made me think of. I was sort of thinking about those people as the one who walked away as people saying that they're not going to actively do it, but they're not going to actively stop it from happening. They're sort of removing themselves.
And from where my feet are planted with this story, planted is probably too strong of a word, my not rebuttal, my response to that would be, well, let's transpose it to a historical setting. Lots of people got out of Nazi Germany because they saw what was coming or they saw what was happening, and they got out to safety and left a lot of people behind that were murdered. So there's if I put it into the historical context, it doesn't feel as, I don't know, as moral. Sometimes you just have to escape. But there's nothing in this story that shows that there would have been any consequences to them trying to intervene, but it was represented in kind of a beautiful way that there was no possibility of anybody affecting any change.
There's a Wikipedia page on this story that's about as long as the story
I'm on
itself.
it right now.
And in it talks about some of the things that inspired her, or sort of the consistent themes. And one of the things that it mentions is the problem of, I mean, I'm not a religious person at all, but it was talking about the sort of philosophical problem of the doctrine of salvation through the sacrifice of Jesus, this being sort of like this kind of moral quandary.
Absolutely.
Which you might, if you're a religious person, might find yourself puzzling over. So this idea basically being that if you are someone who believes in Jesus, you have to at some point become comfortable with the idea that under this philosophy of religion or whatever, Jesus had to die in order for you to be saved, and had to die like in a horrible, painful and tortured way. It's that sort of idea. The
part of the Wikipedia page that I was fascinated by is how much cultural influence this story has had since it was published in 1973. It inspired a K-pop BTS music video.
Wow.
N.K. Jemisin, a lot of her writing is bouncing off this story. Catherine Lacey has an epigraph from this story at the beginning of her 2020 novel Pew, which is coming close to the top of my reading pile. It was integrated into the plot line of one of the Star Trek series episodes. And I read an opinion piece in the New York Times. I blanked on that editorial columnist's name, but this story has had a lot of cultural resonance. It has resonated culturally ever since.
I have chosen one from a collection that we talk about a lot on this podcast, because both myself, Chris, and Alice love this collection, and this is a short story that I probably read 7 or 8 years ago. I do read quite a lot of short stories, as you both and listeners probably feel when you read a short story collection. There are often a lot that you don't remember, but this one just has not left my brain since, and now that you two have read it, you probably know why, because we won't spoil it, This is much longer than the other two that we've talked about, and it very much has an event that happens near the end that we shan't spoil because it would really spoil the story. But that moment is ingrained in my brain and I've never been able to forget it. So the story that I've chosen from Julie Orringer is Pilgrims. And it is about a family who are going to spend Thanksgiving away from home. And when they arrive to this event, it becomes clear that their mother is suffering from cancer, and what they've gone to is an event where either they're with people who are also suffering from cancer, or spouses who have cancer, or people who've lost someone to cancer, and they've all gathered together for Thanksgiving. And what happens is that the children immediately go outside and all play together, but there's a sinister air to the whole event, and what happens at the end is particularly sinister. But I was intrigued to see what you two thought of it, and it was interesting for me because I've talked lots on this podcast before about how I find cancer so triggering. So the fact that I hadn't remembered that that's what this story was about, to reread it, I did worry that I thought maybe I shouldn't be rereading this one, but I still really loved it. And I'd just like to know, what you two made of it and whether you enjoyed it or not.
I really enjoyed this one. I was really surprised by it because I know you've talked about it before. I know all three of you have talked about it. I haven't read it. It's not that everyone likes it except for me. I haven't read it. And you must have talked about this before, but I didn't remember. So I was shocked by this story, and it just made me, the beginning parts where it's sort of more focused on the cancer part, it really reminded me of a book that I know you really like, which I really like as well, which is this The Spare Room by Helen Garner.
Yes.
Where they're just these people who are, and you feel this tension, like knowing that someone is sick, and and this person who is so sick is getting help in inverted commas, and it really put me in mind of that book. But I thought the child narrator, normally I'm not one for a child narrator, but I thought in this instance it made for a really punchy story. Like, it's really successfully used in my opinion. And the way that she uses it means that there's so much happening without her having to actually spend the pages telling you and like sort of waxing lyrical about how sad it is and everything that's happening. The way that she uses the child narrator to sort of quickly get across to the reader how awful this is, I thought was super effective as a writing
in like half
strategy.
A page.
Yes,
it's all there.
Yeah, it's all there, and you as a reader know, like, oh, these are young children, they don't understand what's going on. Oh, this is cancer, this is horrible. Like, it's so effective, I thought.
I think reflecting on that and what you've just said, it makes me think about Fight Night, which obviously I mentioned at the start of the podcast. And actually, when a child narrator's done really well, that's what is really good about it, is that they can get across things quite quickly in an observational way that we don't necessarily do as adults, because I think they describe like hair loss and that kind of stuff, like those observational things that you immediately know that that's what you're dealing with. And she talks about how her and her brother, they're obviously overhearing their parents crying, which just is heartbreaking anyway, and they have like a little code for like tapping on the wall.
Oh, I forgot about that.
And you just think, and it's so short but so effective and heartbreaking. It's just incredibly clever way of doing it.
The one thing that I'm going to push into the conversation more explicitly is that this meeting, this gathering that they're at, it's really like alternative healing, new agey meditation, that vibe, right? And maybe I think the story to a certain degree is interrogating that, if I can use that really pretentious word. And so that part, I hadn't thought specifically of The Spare Room, but that is a perfect comparison. The kids, I mean, the two children, that the narrator and her baby brother, they're basically yanked out into the yard. And then I couldn't help thinking of, and this isn't going to spoil anything. No, it's not. I couldn't help thinking of Lord of the Flies. It just felt like Lord of the Flies out there. Oh my God.
Absolutely.
That's a good one,
because the kids are left to just kind of fend for themselves, aren't they? But what they're thrown into is play that's happening. But what they encounter is like the kids holding the other children hostage, and they're like tied up in the treehouse and stuff. And the parents are very oblivious to it all.
Right.
And this one has a lot of analysis online, so I was intrigued to go and have a look. But it's definitely, there's something in there about pain and trauma and generational trauma, obviously, that when you're in that pain and painful and traumatic place, it's very difficult to look outward at what else is going on. And I think the fact that the kids are just shoved outside and left to it, and then all these awful things are happening, not to the parents, the adults inside, but within that child community. Yeah, I thought it was really, really interesting.
Well, I was just going to say about the knocking thing. You just reminded me of Bodies of Light by Jennifer Down. Have you read that, Shawn?
Oh, no, but I've had somebody on my channel talking about it on the Bite Size Book Chat. Yeah, sounds powerful.
Was that me? Did I just have a breakdown? Was that me? No, that wasn't me.
It wasn't. It was another fabulous Aussie bookish social media celebrity.
Oh, it was Annie, right?
It might have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had several fabulous bookish social media celebrities on my channel. I think it was Annie.
From Books on the Go podcast. That's how I also heard about that book from her. I think that's why I remember watching that.
Yeah.
So Bodies of Light, incredible Australian novel about a girl who grows up in the foster care system. And there's this incredible line in it that I remember about her in one of her first foster homes, and she's talking about this exact thing, a knocking system. And there's this line in the book which was absolutely chilling, where she says, we would knock through the wall to say goodnight, 1 to say hello, 2 to say goodnight, and 3 to say he's coming. And it's like one of the most powerful lines I've ever read in fiction. Like, it was just brilliant. And that's basically all there is to tell you that she's being abused. And it's just sort of, it's such an incredible, it's an incredible book, but yeah, it reminded me of that incredible bit of writing.
So when I was looking up analysis for this story, I came across a quote from Celeste Ng. So she says this is one of her favourite short stories, and it's influenced her writing in general a lot. And she said, in some ways, every story I've written since has been influenced by Pilgrims. It prodded me to delve deeper and darker in my own writing, to follow characters into terrifying places, to allow terrible things to happen, even to characters I loved, even to children. If that's where the story led, it gave me permission, no, it dared me, to see how far I could take a story. And I really liked that, because it is dark, this story. Very dark, in fact.
I would love to hear your thoughts, because I haven't come up with anything particularly insightful about what's the title all about. Is it Pilgrim or Pilgrims?
I think it's Pilgrims.
Well, she thinks that they're doing, like, I thought it was a reference to the narrator thinks that they're doing something like the Thanksgiving. That's what she's talking about, when they're eating that weird vegetarian food.
It's Thanksgiving. That's right.
She says, says the vegetarian herself.
So that's one layer. Is there more?
She says, like, are we like the Pilgrims? Is this what it was? And I thought it was also in reference to the fact that they're sort of sharing their, kind of in reference to the treatment sort of stuff that they're sharing, but yeah, I hadn't thought too much about it, to be honest.
And then I think going out into the backyard is a whole new world, and it's not anyway. Yeah, that's as far as my thinking went. So I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, because what is the dictionary definition of a pilgrim? Like, traveling?
Traveling for religious reasons, is it not?
For religious reasons.
A person who journeys to a sacred place for religious reasons. So certainly that's why the parents are going to this place, because they're seeking spiritual healing for the mother. Not sure how far I would go with trying to wrest meaning out of that title in terms of what's going on in the backyard, but it's almost like going into hell.
Yeah.
The opposite of a sacred place. Yet there are religious rituals that are enacted out there. We can't say too much because it would be a spoiler, but there's one major one, and there might be other ones.
Yeah, particularly right at the end.
Yeah, right at the end.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of ritual in it. It's a story that I think you could keep trying to unpack. It's probably something new you could take out of it every single time.
Yeah.
It definitely, because I knew we were going to talk about it, I definitely thought about it a lot more than I had when I read it originally. Go on, Sarah.
It made me gasp, and I'm sure I'm going to be thinking about it in 10 years as well.
I was about to say, it double shocked me, because it shocked me what happened, and then how it ended. It shocked me again. I was like what the kids actually do at the end. There's sort of last little bit that happens before they drive away. I was really surprised by. It's not once the sort of big event happened, the rest of the story still didn't go anywhere. Like, I never would have predicted that. And I was like, what?
And the rest of the story doesn't finish in your head, because obviously it ends with their Thanksgiving ending. But then my brain just was like, oh my God, what is going to happen now that they've left? Very clever.
So this is a favorite writer of yours, Jenny, is it?
She hasn't written an awful lot, so I think she's got this short story collection. Let me just...
She got a couple of novels, I believe.
Yeah, no, I've only ever read this short story collection, and there's another one in it. I feel like it might be called The Isabel Fish, that really stuck with me as well, because I've probably got them completely mixed up, but there's a story in that collection.
No, you haven't. It's something that the Wikipedia page talks about it. Isabel Fish, yep, you're right.
Yeah, and there's like a car accident where they break through some ice, and that's just another point that's always, cannot remember what the story's about, but that particular visual's really stuck with me. But it's a very good collection, so it's definitely worth a read.
I think I've finally been enticed to read it.
When everybody says how good something is, you kind of think it can't be, surely.
Yes.
Now that I've actually read part of it myself, I'm like, okay, I'll be the judge of that, and I think it's worth reading.
Yes, good. Well, I'm glad I've persuaded you.
Well, do you agree with me? I think it's absolutely remarkable that we have each picked a story that the other two people have liked or loved. I was expecting there to be arguments and big disagreements. This is rather...
That's the joy of short stories, that actually, out of a collection, you can pick ones that are really, really punchy and really, really good. I'd be surprised if we'd come up with some that we didn't like.
Oh, but I think the chances of that are as great as with novels, because people's tastes are so different. So I think this is a really special episode. So there's some poor little girl being tortured in the basement to make this such a utopian episode.
God, Shawn, don't say that.
Like Shawn.
You can edit that out.
No,
it's staying in.
Yeah, don't play that card with Jenny. She just ignores you. I've been so many times. Then my mother, then I get a phone call from my mother because something that I've explicitly told Jenny to cut out, she hasn't. And my mother's like, "You said this on the podcast," and I'm like, "I told Jenny to cut that out."
I really enjoyed that. That was really fun.
That was great.
Definitely do this again.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. That was an excellent suggestion.
As always, it was a delight. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Shawn. I'd love to do an episode like that again. That was great fun. But thank you for listening, everyone. As always, there are loads of different ways you can get in touch with us with any questions, ideas, or feedback. You can email us on thebookcastclub@outlook.com. You could contact us on Instagram. I was going to say Twitter, but I think I've deleted Twitter now. So we're at Bookcast Club on Twitter and Threads.
No, not Twitter, Jen.
Oh, bloody hell. Not Twitter. X. I've deleted it. It's gone. Anyway, sign up for our newsletter on Substack, where you can read more reviews from us, see our pick of the new book releases, hear updates on the podcast, and you can chat to us in the comments. And obviously we'd love you to check out our Patreon, where you can get a 7-day free trial. But for now, happy reading, and we'll be back very soon.
And links to Shawn is in the show notes, as is all the books we talked about.
We've actually, the stories are all online, aren't they? So we will link to the stories.
That's true.
So you guys can read them. Bye-bye.
Bye.